I'm a firm believer that you should read to enjoy. I started writing this when I was 13. Like most 13-year-olds, I'd say, I didn't have a very clear teleos or like in intentionality. The research process was kind of challenging. I'm not going to mince words. It did make me a better researcher. It's not just about what is said, it is also what is not said. It is about the gestures, it's about the silences, it's about the pauses, it's about how much you pause. The one thing that really surprised me was really how open and cosmopolitan the Cholas were. The research I did for my book kind of showed that the Cholas especially were a seafaring empire, and the Cholas were a maritime empire who kind of traded with people as far west as Arabia and as far east as China. In fact, there are Chola temples in Guangzhou. The thing about the Cholas is there's not a lot of research in the mainstream about them at all. They are a very understudied but very historically significant dynasty. Writing is the space that I have to to kind of respond to the today using the yesterday.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us a true Renaissance man weaving together the arts, academics, and storytelling in a way few can match. He's not only an accomplished author but also a talented musician and a dedicated anthropologist in training. Siddharth N. Vijayaraghavan completed his degree at IIT Madras and is currently a Young India Fellow at Ashoka University. And he's really young. With his debut novel, Empire of the Cholas, he already is making a significant impact, skillfully blending historical facts with imaginative fiction to create a story that captivates and enchants. His unique perspective and diverse talent shine through in his writing, offering readers a fresh and compelling take on a fascinating period of history. So join me as I welcome today the multi-talented Siddharth N. Vijayaraghavan, a storyteller whose work really promises to inspire and intrigue. And I'm sure the book, world is going to read many more works from Siddharth. Welcome, Siddharth, in today's episode.
Thank you so much, Mohua, and thank you for having me on the podcast and for also for the very generous introduction. I don't feel nearly as young as you describe me to be.
Oh, yeah, you are. So, your book, Empire of the Cholas, delves into the construction of the big temple in Tanjavur. What inspired you to center your debut novel around this historical event?
I did not. So I started writing this when I was 13, right? And when I started doing it when I was 13, you really, like most 13-year-olds, I'd say, I didn't have a very clear teleos or like in intentionality. So we had gone on a family trip to Tanjavur and we were visiting temples in Tanjavur. And I had gone to the big temple and it was December, I still remember. And it was a space that kind of captivated my imagination. And as we were driving back to our hotel where we were staying, the story just came to me. And when the story kind of came to me, I was like, okay, all right, let me just try writing it and see where it takes me. And so, yeah, that was basically how it started. Part of it is, cultural memory in terms of my grandmother and my mother all being from that region, not specifically Tanjavur, but that particular region of the world. And part of it is also kind of like my own curiosity with history, my own curiosity regarding people, and an inability to like keep things to myself, the need to like be very expressive at all times. So I think all of these kind of combined. And again, I started writing this book just, just like that. And I didn't know where it would take me. And it took me here in a podcast with you 10 years later. So that
Oh,
is
how
basically how it
wonderful is
started.
that? Amazing, Siddharth. So you're a debut novelist who's, must have had challenges in bringing the Empire of the Cholas to life. So how did you overcome all of that, Siddharth?
So there were, I think, I kind of, so there's this author named Anuk Arulprakasam who kind of like said that he sees writing novels as a kind of apprenticeship. So I didn't see them, the challenges that I encountered, necessarily as challenges. I kind of said it as the way I kind of looked at it was, okay, I don't know this. Let me try doing it again and again, or let me try sticking with it and see where it takes me. So, one challenge that I definitely had was in kind of like doing the research, because when I started doing my research, this was back, it was 10 years ago, right? And 10 years ago, there wasn't as much on the internet as there is now. And the internet and a couple of guidebooks I'd gotten from the Tanjavur temple. were the only real resources I had at that time. So back then, I had to like kind of use my imagination to fill in the gaps, fill in the lines. And then as time progressed, and like with the growth of online communities and my own growth as a person, because I was, after all, just like in the dawn of my teens. So as I grew up, I kind of, my research skills also sharpened because of this. And because of that, I kind of like started doing better research. I started thinking more creatively and things like that. That was one challenge. The other challenge is I had to write about a time that neither I nor anybody I'd known had lived through. I don't think there's anybody alive who was alive during the Chola times. I'm pretty sure about that. So I had to recreate the feel of the time based on based not on what people remembered, but what people kind of imagined the time to be. So I had to kind of balance historical accuracy and kind of popular imaginations of what the time were. And these are not exactly opposites. They're kind of overlapping, but it was still kind of anachronisms that I needed to balance, things like that. That was a challenge, and here I had to turn to literature. There's an author named Kalki Krishnamurti, who was one of the greatest Tamil writers of all time, and he kind of wrote a lot of novels on the Choras. So I kind of turned to his descriptions. I kind of turned to his how he described characters in order to understand how to do that, and kind of I tried to put my own spin on it. I don't know how well it has come. That's for the readers who have read Kalki and me to uh, tell me, but I've tried. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So, how did you approach the research process for the book? Were there any very surprising discoveries that did not make it to the narrative or made it to the narrative that you'd like to share with our listeners?
So, the research process, like I said, kind of grew up as I grew up and as the internet also grew up, and like my ability to search. So, one person whom I really relied on is this Chora historian named K.A. Nilakanta Shastri, who wrote a history of the Choras back in 1935. Right now, looking back, it is about nearly 90 years ago, and it remains one of the best researched books on the Choras. I had the opportunity and the privilege to have the mentorship of Dr. Chitra Madhavan, who is one of India's leading experts on South Indian temples and South Indian temple architecture. So I had the opportunity to like talk to her. I had my own reading on the time. I had a couple of guidebooks. So I think it's the Archaeological Survey of India, which runs temple, right? So they put out guidebooks on the temple, and yeah, I mean, that was what I had to go by. Uh, the research process was kind of challenging. I'm not going to mince words. Um, it did make me a better researcher, and it's kind of the reason why I'm also trying to make research the thing I do full time, like all the time. It taught me to be more resourceful. It taught me to be creative, and it also taught me to also kind of shut up, in a certain sense, to put it very crudely. Shut up and like just take in what the scholarship says, rather than trying to force my own interpretation. The one thing that really surprised me was really how open and cosmopolitan the Choras were. You'd not associate, like, until then, my understanding of Indian history was that India was kind of this hermetically sealed container which really did not interact much with the outside world. But then my research the research I did for my book kind of showed that that was not really the case. And the Choras, especially, were a seafaring empire. And the Choras were a maritime empire who kind of traded with people as far west as Arabia and as far east as China. In fact, there are Chora temples in Guangzhou. This is something I could not include in the book. It's very fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are remains of that over there, and there are historical documents on both ends signifying this cultural exchange. So we have this imagination of India just existing in a bubble when it really did not. And in fact, like, whatever constitutes the Indian subcontinent or Bharatavarsha or whatever, kind of was the center of like trade and commerce for its own region. Until and kind of this idea that we were not was something that was more that came much later, that came due to a colonial imagination rather than what was reflected in material reality. So yeah, that is something interesting. I think I try to bring out the cosmopolitan aspects of it in my book through the character of Roland Grape, who is Danish person who I sent back 600 years, 600, 700 years to be part of my narrative. And he also very generously agreed, of course. And yeah, I mean, that is basically how that happened.
So, do you think there is a danger in glorifying an empire that, by today's standards, might have been very imperialistic and also oppressive? You know, um, what is your take on that?
That's a very interesting question. And there is definitely a danger to that. Um, I don't. There is a not. The thing about the Choras is there is not a lot of research in the mainstream about them at all. They are a very understudied but very historically significant dynasty, and so because of that, your people who do actual valid historical research, not people who write novels, kind of have to grapple with like presenting facts and also being sensitive to the context, and that is a challenge and a concern that I definitely shared. Um, what I tried to do in the novel is basically kind of look at it more as a human story. And rather than showing it like Chora pride, for instance, I try to show it as okay, look at these people, look at what human on the world can accomplish, look at what spirits of unity and unity in diversity of thought, unity in diversity of action, what that can accomplish. And I think that is how I try to navigate that. There is, like you said, there is definitely a danger. And while I can account for me intending not to glorify, which is what I tried to do, I cannot account for people reading it as a glorification. Unfortunately, I really would like to, but for better or for worse, I cannot. So yeah, the there is I for tried. That is also one of the reasons I kind of focus on human on the word, because while humans might be very complex, I believe that the power of human endeavor and like human determination and human imagination is something that really propels people forward. And that's something that speaks across time and space. So that became more central to how I saw my book rather than the details of the empire and their glorification.
So, you are an anthropologist in training, right? You're taught to look
Yeah.
at cultures very objectively, but your novel might kind of seem like you're taking a side in interpreting history. Now, how do you balance the objectivity of anthropology with the subjective nature of storytelling? Because both are contradictory in nature.
Thank you for this question. So when I wrote this book, I was neither anthropologist in training nor am I ever was a historian. I did not have those disciplinary trainings. I was just somebody with an access to a Microsoft Word file and a lot of things to say. So I didn't think of it then, but as I kind of grew up, that is something I thought about. And my interest in anthropology also is like fairly recent. It's like over the past 4 to 5 years. So to answer your question, I don't like the way I understand anthropology, it doesn't teach people to look at uh, cultures in a very objective way. I think the method of anthropology, which is called ethnography, which is basically you live with the culture, you inhabit their way of being for about 18 months, and then you come back and you write about it. In itself is not is more empirical, it's more experiential rather than something that is objective or has an eye in the sky, as it were. Right? So I kind of leaned more into the embeddedness of it. I mean, and I believe that an embedded perspective is very valuable in a way that an objective perspective kind of misses out on details. And to come back to the question of like writing and history and anthropology, I think first of all, I think fundamentally all knowledge is interpretative. Like, uh, I'm currently doing a course in statistics, and one of the things that I'm realizing that even in something that seems so objective like statistics, you can literally like cherry pick data. You can say that I'm looking at this and that, and you can arrive at solutions. Where is the objectivity? Where is the neutral perspective in that? Right? So, uh, I don't think that trying to be objective, I mean, while it might be a new good goal, I think it's better to start from the position of acknowledging one's embeddedness. And for me, I also saw writing this book also like in retrospect, because like I kind of am older and I know more right now. I kind of saw writing this book as a form of embedding myself in a different context, in a different culture, in a different setting. And that kind of embeddedness was something that, you know, uh, is in a way also ethnographic, in a way also anthropological, and in a way is also very dislocating for me. But I think that there should be, I think there's a lot that speaks across cultures and times and all of that. So yeah.
So, with a growing emphasis on cultural sensitivity, do you ever second guess, your portrayal of certain characters, events, fearing that it might just be misinterpreted and offend a few groups? Did you ever think about it?
I did, especially again, like more recently when I kind of also developed a more nuanced understanding of these things. And I want to return to something I'd said earlier, which is basically that I can account for my intentions and I can account for what I have written. And right, the text of that and what my I intended is something that I can account for. And I have tried to be as culturally sensitive and as empathetic as possible. But at the same time, they will, this is an age of, injury, as it were. Like people, everybody, it's age of heightened emotions. It's an age of injury. It's an age where this very idea of humor has been weaponized and has acquired a very explicitly political dimension. The ability to take a joke versus the ability to not take a joke. The ability to like respond sensitively versus not responding sensitively. I cannot account for all perspectives. I cannot account for how every single one of my readers can treat it. All I can account for are my intentions and whether I am honest to my intentions and whether I tried my best. So, if I were to ask myself, did I try my best to be as culturally sensitive and as empathetic and respectful towards the communities I represent in the book, towards the peoples I represent in the book? Yes. Is this the perfect or most appropriate way to? Probably not. But, like, I'm also here to learn, right? Like, I think that's also worth bearing that we are all here, we are all students, we are all here to learn. And I am willing to learn and I'm willing to be corrected. And I look forward to being corrected and teaching myself and introspecting uh, regarding those things. That doesn't mean that I should not write. That does not mean I should not express. That doesn't mean that I should not pen these stories. What that means is that I should not carry a kind of this idea of an author god complex in my head when I do that, because that, in my opinion, is misplaced. I mean, like I said earlier, like authorship is a form of apprenticeship, right? You're also learning in the process, and the learning, in my view, continues after you finish the book. So yeah.
So, the big temple in Tanjavur, which you write about, is a symbol of religious and cultural heritage. Given the recent temple related disputes in India, do you think these structures are being politicized in ways that diverge from their original purposes? So, today, there is so much of politics around temples, right? So, tell me a little bit about your thought on this.
So it was not like temples became political spaces or politicized over the past 10 years. Temples have been political for as long as temples have existed, because temples are inherently political spaces. They're not just religious, but they're also political spaces. For example, the big temple was built as a show, partly also as a show of political authority, which is something I go into in my book. But the very nice thing about writing a novel and not writing history is I can kind of interpret things in the way that I want to. I'm not as faithfully
You're free.
beholden to the. Huh?
You're
Sorry.
freer, with your own expressions and your own
Yeah,
understanding. Yes.
precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. In a way, it is like liberating. I mean, in a way,
Yeah.
it comes with its own, but it also comes with its own responsibility, saying that, okay, I'm writing this book in a time of increased polarization. I'm writing this in an age of increased intolerance. Writing this in a time of increased authoritarianism. And I'm writing about something which is kind of a symbol of, you know, the ruling concerns, right? So, what do I do? I mean, like I am free from I'm free from having to represent every single thing. But now my question becomes, what do I choose? What do I choose to include and what do I not choose to include, which inherently is also a political question. So what I tried to do to navigate this is kind of show, again, like what I said earlier, kind of the universal values of diversity, the ability, the importance of working together, the idea that you are all united by a shared goal. And these are the values that I want my readers to take away. What I do not want my readers to take away is that we should build, not the letter of it, right? That we should build temples, we should build temples, we should build temples, but rather, what are the temples that we can engage with, the metaphorical temples we can engage with in our own lives, right? What are the ways that we can kind of see beyond ourselves and see in, look at other people and kind of contribute towards building something? What are the ways in which we can really understand what human on the world can really take us? What is the possibility that lies in front of us if we just imagine different, if we think different, if we dream big, if we dream bigger? All of those are the things that I want my readers to take away. And I think that these values, in my opinion, are far more important and far more I mean, to use a very corporate word, transferable, and have far more important in today's age than the letter of the book, which is about temples. So I would, if I were to read my book as a reader, imagining that I did not write the book, I would read it as an allegory. I would read it as a metaphorical tale. I mean, the temple is the vehicle, yes, but I'm trying to tell a broader story. I'm trying to convey a broader idea.
In today's India, there is a huge uprising in patriarchy, right? And particularly, this is going on right now. And if you read and if you see that there's a certain awakening, so there is a struggle in the religious and the cultural context also. How do you see the role of women, perpetuating or challenging patriarchal norms, both in history and in today's world?
So, one of the things that I was very conscious about when writing, and it was also backed up by historical evidence, is that I wanted to portray women of all classes, of all strata and society, as having agency and strength. This is backed up by historical evidence because Chola royal women had a great say in kind of what was going on in the state. Right, this is very well documented. And speaking from my own personal experience, I was raised by a woman. My mother, I was raised by a very strong, very intelligent single mother, and that is something that very that informed the way that I wrote. And I wanted to be empathetic towards that, and I wanted to kind of portray that in my book. At the same time, it is not like, I mean, speaking as a cisgendered man, it is, I, I can only imagine how hard it must be to be a woman in India, across geography, across time, but especially today and now. Right? I mean, I'm not going to I'm not going to go into details because this is A, very well established, and B, a man explaining why women are treated terribly is not exactly a great thing to do. But that is also something that I've tried to acknowledge through my writing. So again, writing is the space that I have to to kind of respond to the today using the yesterday. And it's not that I don't acknowledge kind of loneliness. I don't acknowledge the patriarchy. I acknowledge all of these, but I also show people kind of surviving and, transcending that. And not everybody has the privilege to do so. Not some people just become, I don't want become party to their circumstances, and that's also fine. Strength is not a virtue that everybody should be expected to have at all points of time, right? Like, you should not be expected to be strong, and it's okay if you're not. But at the same time, I think that strength is also something that provides a lot of hope, that provides a lot of optimism. So very recently I came across this quote by this Italian communist anarchist theorist named Antonio Gramsci, and what he said is, the pessimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will, which basically means that yes, things suck, right? Things are really messed up in the world today, but you also have this optimism of the will that you have the power to change it. It is not like me, because I wrote a few strong female characters in my book, doesn't mean that patriarchy ends tomorrow either, right? It does that is also not the case. But for me, it is a space for me to show that, look, strength is possible despite all of this, right? You can still be aware of how sucky things can be, and also, try to go beyond that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely, and very articulate. So, if you have a conversation with any historical figure from the Chola period, who would it be and what would you ask them?
So, just to like link between the previous question and this question, I would talk to the character of Kundavai, who is the sister of Raja Chola and a very important character in my book. What I would ask them is kind of, how do you wield political authority as a woman, and how do you get yourself taken seriously as a woman in a room full of men, including your own brother? And also, how do you negotiate that very tricky line between a professional, I mean, what I imagine now, I guess there's a divide between a professional and the personal, but what is it like to administer back in Chora times, and what is it like to kind of run a government back then, especially given that your family is running the entire empire? So where do the boundaries lie? Where do the boundaries end? Where do the boundaries begin? Because I'm somebody who's very interested in, especially specifically in the anthropology of kinship, and the anthropology of kinship is about families and family structures. And I'm also interested in the anthropology of state, which is basically how do bureaucracies function, how does a state function, how does a government function from a very um, fine grained lens. So these are the kinds of questions that I would ask Kundabai.
So, you've been an anthropologist in training, and how does your understanding of human cultures and societies shape your perspective as a storyteller, and also being in training in a subject that requires you to think differently?
What it taught me, what anthropology has given me, is kind of the ability, or like it has reinforced the importance of not being judgmental and trying to inhabit a state of being. And kind of to do that, you can't come in with preconceived notions, you can't come in with judgments, you can't come in with your own biases. To a certain extent, you need to, I mean, like we talked about objectivity slightly earlier. This is a form of objectivity that anthropology has, the kind of ability to say, okay, uh this is what is, and this is the what I'm going to inhabit. For me, this subjectivity is objective, and I'm going to try to inhabit this subjectivity to and see how that informs my worldview, right? So I think that that is one thing that I definitely learned. This thing, the ability to be less judgmental. The second thing I really learned is to listen, and this is not really relevant in a very literal sense with my book, because again, there was no telephone that I could call up Raja Chola and say, "Hi, how did you construct the temple?" That was not an option I had, but to listen through the pages of history and to listen between the lines, to listen in pauses, to listen in silences. So my aunt would constantly say, it's not just about what is said, it is also what is not said. It is about the gestures, it's about the silences, it's about the pauses, it's about how much you pause. So kind of the fine grained attention to detail and the ability to observe, because participant observation is massive in ethnographic method, which forms the base of anthropology. So I'd say that these are the two things that really informed my writing.
So, your education spans both India and Singapore. How have these different cultural experiences influenced your worldview and creativity?
So I grew up in Singapore for 13 years, and I spent 14 years of my life, because during the pandemic, my mother lives in Singapore. So I went and lived with her for a year during the pandemic. I particularly did not like Singapore. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on a podcast, but yeah. I did not particularly care for the kind of environment that I was in. I did not particularly care for any of that. So my time in Singapore was kind of spent yearning for India, and I really, really would want to go back. At one point, like I lived in Chennai. We were from Chennai, right? So at one point, I like had like the flight schedule from Singapore to Chennai memorized. I'd be like, okay, I will just go. And 12-year-old me would be like, okay, I can just go to the airport at this time, and I can just like show myself, and somehow they will get a ticket, and somehow I'll get to go back to Chennai. But what Singapore really gave me is, I mean, of course, an education. I did my schooling over there. But what it really gave me was kind of an appreciation of multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism, both in terms of what it can do and also kind of the limits of it. So yeah, that is what Singapore gave me. And coming back to India was coming back to a home that I had not lived in for a very long time. I had established it as a home in my head, and it was always an idea that I clung on to. So to live in India again was really fun. And it was a really rewarding experience. I'd like to say that I was raised in Singapore, but I grew up in India. And the past 6 years have been great for that. So yeah, I mean, India also kind of taught me a very different form of multiculturalism. I went to a very diverse campus. I went to IIT Madras, which has people from all over India, all kinds of backgrounds, like diversity in both ends of the spectrum. When people speak of diversity, they usually talk about like only it being towards like diversity is reduced to representation of people who have undergone deprivation, but in reality, it's the entire spectrum, right? So
Mhm.
I was exposed to a lot of diversity, which I was not really exposed to in Singapore, a different kind of diversity. I learned a lot, I unlearned a lot. So all of these have been kind of trainings in how to look at different forms of diversity, different forms of difference, and how do I kind of embed myself in all of that. So yeah,
Amazing. So, what do you think the readers can take away from your book, Siddharth?
I hope a good time. I hope they enjoy it. I think I'm a firm believer that you should read to enjoy. So I really hope that they really enjoy it. But if they want you to take away something philosophical, or if they want to take something elevated, which they don't have to, I sometimes don't. In fact, most of the times don't. And I have a degree in English. So if you had to take away something philosophical, I think it will be kind of what human effort can do and what human imagination can do. More than effort, I think imagination can do, and what imagination can achieve both in the present and in the future. There's kind of, I'm somebody who I always likes living in the future, right? So I really enjoy writing about the future and thinking about the future from various perspectives. And I think if there's one thing the book that comes through is kind of what imagining a future really can do to one, right? I consider that to be like the central idea that I want my readers to take away.
Thank you, Siddharth, for being on today's podcast. And we wish you really lots and lots of luck in many more books. And for all our listeners, this was Siddharth Vijayaraghavan, the author of Empire of the Cholas. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you so much, Mohua, for the wonderful questions and the really great fun.
Oh, thank you so much, Siddharth.